Asmadgurubhyo namaha, Asmadpadavagurubhyo namaha, Asmadsarvagurubhyo namaha. So we're continuing on with our discussion of Vaishnavism, and we're talking about its historical development. So previously we talked about Vaishnavism in the Vedas, Vaishnavism in other ancient scriptures, and I think we even talked about Vaishnavism in the Nalaya Prabandham. But anyhow, now we're going to continue on, and so we're going to talk about Vaishnavism, development of Vaishnavism by Natha Muni, Yamuna Muni, Yamunacharya, Alavandar, and Ramanuja. So the next stage of development of Vaishnavism comes with the era of the advent of three eminent acharyas, Natha Muni, Yamuna, and Ramanuja. Who are regarded as the three principal pontiffs of Vaishnavism. Sometimes we hear people use this term, Munitraya Sampradaya. Munitraya Sampradaya. So most commonly, of course, people say Ramanuja Sampradaya because Ramanuja is considered the founder of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. But here he's talking about Munitraya Sampradaya, or the three initial acharyas. So after the Alvars, we talk about the acharyas. So Natha Muni, Yamunacharya, and Ramanuja. So Natha Muni was born in 824 CE, or approximately 824 CE. Yamuna, also known as Alavanda, was born in around 916 CE. And Ramanuja in 1017 CE. Here he's using AD, of course. More recently, scholars, instead of using AD and BC, which mean Anno Domini in the year of our Lord, and BC, which means before Christ, right? So now scholars prefer to use CE, which means common era, and BCE, before the common era, meaning before and after the traditional time of Christ. As already observed, Vaishnava religion has been prevalent right from the Vedic era, right from the Vedic period. Its teachings have been found scattered in the Vedas, including the Upanishads, Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Puranas, the Agamas, and the hymns of the Alvars. So that's what we previously talked about in the last session. All of those different scriptures, both Sanskrit and the Tamil of the Alvars, the Nalaya Prabandha, the 4,000 verses of the Alvars, which are together called Ubhaya Vedanta. Vedanta means the end of all knowledge. And Ubhaya means the two different ends of all knowledge, meaning the vernacular Tamil and the classical Sanskrit, classical and of course Vedic Sanskrit. During this long period of growth, several other rival schools of thought, both philosophical systems as well as religious cults, have come up. So in India, there are several other philosophical systems as well as religious cults. So there's a distinction, scholars usually make a distinction between philosophies and religions. A religion is a practical application of a particular theology, and a philosophy is the doctrinal basis for that theology, or for that. Some religions are just more or less theologies, and are not exactly based on very, very solid philosophical principles, but many of them are based on philosophical principles. Okay, so he's going to talk a little bit about that. So we have had Buddhism, Jainism, Pasupata, and other forms of Shaivism. So there's different types of Shaivism, specifically Pashupata. The word Pashupata. Buddhism, of course, is philosophy that came up with the advent of Gautama Buddha, and who had particular teachings which turned into four main schools in India, and then later on spread across Asia and split up into lots and lots of different schools today. And then we have Jainism, which is somewhat confined to India today, but it was quite prominent in Karnataka, especially, and other parts of India, and also and came up from had different saints who preached Jainism, and that's also split up into two main groups: the Digambara and the Svetambara, the ones that wear clothes and the ones that don't wear clothes. Then we have the Pashupata. Pashupata, the word Pashu here, Pashu means animal. In Tamil, actually, the word Pashu means cow. But Pashu means animal, and Pata means the Lord of the animals. In the Pashupata system, the jivas, or the individual souls, are called Pashus. They're called animals. So they're called basically, so even the human beings or whatever, living beings themselves are called Pashus because they're all under the control of the Pashupati, the Lord of the animals, right? The Lord of the souls, let's say. So Pashupata is a large school of Shaivism. There are some other forms of Shaivism also. And then Shaktism, which speaks about the Supreme as the Mother Goddess. So it talks about the Supreme in feminine terms, which has several different branches also in India. So all of these things came up. On the philosophical side, then we have other schools like Sankhya. Sankhya literally means counting. Has to do with empirical or scientific understanding of the creation of the world. And there are two branches of Sankhya: the Nirishwara and the Sarishwara. The branch of Sankhya which deals with science, but believes that there is a God that is the creator. And then there's an atheistic type of science or empirical science, Sankhya also. The yoga school, which is Patanjali's Astanga Yoga, which talks about the different 8 forms of yoga. Nyaya, which means logic, which there are basically 2 schools. There's the original school of logic, of Indian logic, and then there's a newer school of logic, which had its base in Navadvip in West Bengal. So there was a great resurgence of Nyaya in Bengal, a new type of Nyaya, which is so both the new Navya Nyaya, the new form of Nyaya, and the old traditional form of Nyaya or logic. Vaisheshika, Mimamsa simply means discussion or deliberation, and Advaita also. Advaita, which is Advaita as well as the Beta schools of thought. So these are all different flavors of Vedanta. The Advaita, of course, the Mimamsa refers to Karmakanda, the school of thought that Shankaracharya also spoke against, which used the Vedas but was interested more in just the attainment of heaven, by performing the Vedic sacrifices. And Advaita and other Beta means difference. So Beta means difference and non-difference. Other schools of difference, some difference, and a little bit of some difference and non-difference together. So this is Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash, the 2 great teachers of Beta schools. Before Nimbarka and Chaitanya school, because Nimbarka and Chaitanya school are also schools of Beta, but they're later schools of Beta. But the original schools of Beta is Bhaskara, and then later on at the time of Ramanuja, Yadava Prakash, who was actually the original Gurukul teacher of Ramanuja. So we have Advaita, though, became one of the prominent schools, one of the 3 prominent schools of Vedanta. And then, and of course, he's not mentioning Madhva here yet, but Madhva came along also after Ramanuja. So these schools came up, different takes on Vedanta, right? So these are all different philosophical schools, right? So then, as far as the religious schools that came up, the main opposition to Vaishnavism as a religious cult, not necessarily the opposition to Vaishnavism as a philosophy, were all these philosophical schools. The opposition to Vaishnavism as a religious cult in the theology of Vaishnavism was Shaivism, Buddhism, and Jainism. So in order to uphold the teachings of Vaishnavism as against other rival religious creeds, there was an urgent need to consolidate and systematize the thoughts found in different religious works, and also for the propagation of the religion. So this task was fulfilled to a large extent by Ramanuja and his forerunners, Nathamuni and Yamunacharya. So though all the three acharyas are the exponents of Vaishnavism, major credit goes to Ramanuja in terms of the contribution made by written works and the propagation of religion through a large number of well-qualified apostles. Right, so disciples of Ramanuja. So Ramanuja himself wrote 9 works. Right, he wrote 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras, a full one, a very full and complete one called Sri Bhashya, a shorter one called Vedanta Deepa, and a summary type one called Vedanta Sara. He wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He wrote a sort of a summary study of the Upanishads called Vedanta Sangraha. So what's that? That's 5, right? Then three prose works called the Gadyas, Sri Sharanagati Gadya, Vaikuntha Gadya, and Sri Ranga Gadya. And then one more book on daily practices and rituals for his disciples called the Nitya Grantha. Okay, so these are 9 works of Ramanuja. As will be shown presently, the monumental works such as Sri Bhashya, commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, Gita Bhashya, and Vedanta Sangraha, and the Gadyas, the prose lyrics, bear evidence to the extent of his intellectual contribution to the Vishishtadvaita system and Vaishnava theology. So the reason why he mentions here the Vishishtadvaita system is the Vishishtadvaita system is the philosophical basis for the theology of Vaishnavism and Sri Vaishnavism. Right, and Vaishnava theology is of course the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. So, but Ramanuja owes his knowledge to the works of both Nathamuni and Yamuna, as he himself acknowledges this debt in gratitude in the opening verses of Gita Bhashya. So, just having a look at the footnotes here. According to the biography of Ramanuja, he appointed 74 well-qualified apostles, who are called for the purpose of propagation of Vaishnavism. These are regarded as Simhasanadipatis and are also known as Acharya Purushas or preceptors. So so Ramanuja began to spread the philosophy of Vaishnavism through these different disciples. And here is talking about later on, he, in his Gita Bhashya, in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, he of course wrote basically a summary study on the Upanishads, and then 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra and a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, because Shankara had set up the system of making commentaries on these primary texts, which are called the Prasthana Trayi, the 3 primary texts: the Vedanta Sutras, the Upanishads, and the Brahmas and the Bhagavad Gita, as being essential for any school of thought. And in fact, even the Shaivites, even other people are following the system. Even people who are not Vaishnavas are following the system. So, for instance, we have in the Shaiva school of Vishishtadvaita Shaivism by Srikara, he has written a commentary on the Brahma Sutras, and you find several people from non-Vaishnava schools who've written commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, even though Bhagavad Gita seems to be a very Vaishnava text. We find that even non-Vaishnavas, they're writing commentaries on Bhagavad Gita. For instance, yesterday I was listening to I was listening to a YouTube video put out by Shaiva, a proponent of Shaivism, right? and he was quoting some Tamasic Purana, Kurma Purana, and he was saying that there are some verses in Kurma Purana where Vyasadeva mentions to Arjuna that how Arjuna is a great devotee of Shiva, and how Arjuna saw the universal form of Shiva on the right before the battle of Kurukshetra, and how Krishna explained the greatness of Shiva to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. So, different people have different concepts. I was a little bit amazed at that. I looked up to see if I could find those verses in Kurma Purana. Even though it's a Tamasic Purana, we don't accept that these ideas, even if they're there, even if they're not interpolations, which I believe are their interpolations now because I couldn't find those actual verses. So it seems to be just a myth that somebody's trying to propagate. But still, you see that people do have these different concepts of even the Bhagavad Gita, right? Very strange concepts of the Bhagavad Gita. So there are commentaries by non-Vaishnavas even on the Gita, which you would think is a very straightforward Vaishnava text. So in the same way, Ramanuja states that he is following the views expressed by older saints like Bodhayana. So he actually mentions Bodhayana, Tanka, Dramida, Kapardin. These are some of the Purva Acharyas or previous teachers that he is basing his writing on. So there are some schools of thought. There are some schools of thought that we find. There are some schools of thought where we find the propounders of these new schools of thought will just say, look, this is my opinion. It's not based on anything that has come before me, but I have also got some or in other words, sometimes they say, this is my opinion, but also I'm taking the opinions of older acharyas or older teachers, older sages. So here Ramanuja clearly is not the initiator. He's not thinking up his philosophy. He's simply repeating what the previous acharyas have said. So he mentions their names actually in Sri Bhashya and in some of his works. Bodhayana, Tanka, Dramida, Karpagin. These are some people that he credits. In fact, in the story of Ramanuja's life, Ramanuja and his main disciple Kuresha went to Kashmir. Imagine going from South India, Tamil Nadu, they went all the way by walk up to Kashmir, right in the far north of India, to see the manuscripts of attributed to Bodhayana, the Bodhayana's commentary on the Vedanta Sutras. So it says here, Ramanuja gives credit in his Gita Bhasya in the opening verse to Yamuna and to Nathamuni. Vasutam upayatoham yamuneyam namamitam, which is a Tanian or a pranam mantra, a prayer in praise of the previous teachers that he praised to Yamuna. So the footnote 113 explains that the opening statement of Ramanuja in his Sri Bhashya is Bhagavad Bodhayana Kritam Nishtirnam Brahma Sutra Vritim Purvacharya Santikshupu Tanmatanusarena Sutraksharani Yakyasyante. So he does mention that he's taken this information from the Purvacharyas, the previous teachers. So now Nathamuni is considered to be the first acharya in Sri Vaishnavism, in the lineage, in the Guru Parampara. He wrote two works, Nyaya Tattva and Yoga Rahasya. But both of these works are not extant now, so we only know there may be some quotations from them, but we don't have them in full. Some people may have quoted for them. It is very difficult to evaluate their contents because we don't have them today. However, the Nyaya Tattva must have been an important philosophical treatise both to Ramanuja and because both Vedanta, because both Ramanuja and Vedanta Deshika have referred to it. Nata Muni made a significant contribution to Vaishnavism by rediscovering the 4,000 hymns of the Alwars. So this is a story which you can find in the Guru Parampara Prabhavam, which speaks about the lineage of Ramanuja and gives all the stories about how the lineage came down. More or less, it's a hagiography, or hagiography means life of saints. It speaks about the recovery of the hymns which had almost been lost in Nata Muni's time by performing yogic meditation by Nata Muni, to whom these were revealed by Nam Alwar. So the actual story is that goes like this, that Nata Muni had gone to Kumbakonam, which is about 70 kilometers east of Srirangam, and he had gone to a temple there called, there's several large temples there. One temple is called Sarangapani, which is a deity of, it's a very interesting temple. Inside the temple, there's a stone, the stone deity room of the deity is in the shape of a chariot. So the deity is considered to be like Lord Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Although it's a Sheshashayana deity, it's a deity of Vishnu lying down on Shesha, on Ananta Shesha. Still, it's Sarangapani. So he went to Sarangapani and he observed in Sarangapani some Vaishnavas during the prayers and the different liturgies that were going on in the temple. He observed some that they were singing some of this about I think 11 verses of the Narayana Divya Pramandam, of the 4,000 verses. Now, in the 11 Tamil verses that these people were chanting in the temple as a litany, as part of the worship of Sarangapani, in their chanting in the verses, it was mentioned that there are 4,000 verses. So it was mentioned that there are 4,000 verses. So afterwards, he went up to these people who are called Aryas. Aryas are the people in the temples who chant the Tamil Prabandhas in front of the deity. And he asked those people, okay, so you were singing the glorification of the Lord in 11 verses, and it mentions in those verses that there are 4,000 verses. So can I learn all those 4,000 verses? Where are all those 4,000 verses written down? And those people said, well, we only know 11 verses. We don't know 4,000. So, but if you want to know, if anybody knows those 4,000 verses, they might be known further down in South India, in a place called Tirunelveli district, in a place called Alwar Tirunagari, which is the birthplace of Nam Alwar. So Nam Alwar, who's the head of the Alwars, if you go to his place, even though he's thousands of years before, but still, if you go there, those people may know. So he went down there. Actually, nobody knew down there either. I said, but there was one person there who was a descendant of Nam Alwar's disciple, Madhurakavi Alwar. So Nam Alwar has one disciple called Madhurakavi Alwar. And Madhurakavi Alwar is sometimes called an Alwar, sometimes not called an Alwar, because he wrote one prayer in Tamil, which is included in the Nalaya Prabandham, but it's a prayer only to Nam Alwar. It's a prayer to his guru, and it's supposed to be the quintessence or the essence of Guru Bhakti or devotion to the teacher. And that prayer is called Kananun Siddhatamba. It's a very interesting prayer. And so Nata Muni asked that person, whose name was, I believe, I don't know, Parankushadas or somebody, his name was, I forget exactly that person's name. He asked that descendant of Madhurakavi Alwar to teach him that prayer. And that person said, maybe if you pray to Nam Alwar with this prayer of his disciple, Madhurakavi Alwar, if you recite it maybe 25,000 times or so, then maybe Nam Alwar will appear to you in trance or in a dream, in a yogic vision, and will bless you with the rest of these 4,000 verses. And so that's exactly what happened according to the story, which is given in Guru Parampara Prabhupada. So that's the story, basically. So that's why we have the Nalari Divya Prabandham today. We have the 4,000 verses of the Tamil saints, which had been lost. You know, why do we have them today? We have them today because of the story of Natamuni finding them. So very important for the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. And because the Alwars spoke about bhakti, and they were the first saints in India to really speak about bhakti, they've had an influence also on many other more modern Vaishnava Sampradayas. So, okay, so their hymns are very important. So Natamuni made a significant contribution to Vaishnavism by rediscovering the 4,000 hymns of the Alwars, rearranging them into 4 parts, right? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000. So we have the Mudalayaram, we have the Irindarayaram, the Moonrayaram, and then the Yarpa or the Nalayaram. These 4,000s that they're divided up into, and introducing their recitation in different Vaishnava temples. So this was the contribution of Natamuni. So introducing its recitation by Vaishnavas as part of the worship in temples. Following the teachings of Nam Alwar, Natamuni seems to have advocated the adoption of property or self-surrender as a means of salvation in place of rigorous bhakti yoga. So, as we all know, there are these 2 processes. They're considered to be separate by some Vaishnavas. They're considered to be part of the same process by some Vaishnavas. They are surrender to God or self-surrender, called property, and bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga meaning devotional acts, or devotional service to God. So these are two processes for reaching God, attaining mystic union with God, or yoga, which are taught in the Bhagavad Gita, which are taught in the Upanishads. Actually, self-surrender, this property is also taught in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, as the Nyasa Vidya. It's called the Nyasa Vidya. So there are 32 Upanishadic Vidyas or processes of meditation which are taught in the Vedas themselves. So one of them is this property of self-surrender. So now Yamunacharya was the grandson of Natamuni. So Natamuni had a grandson called Yamunacharya, has written a few important works. So we dealt with Natamuni. So Yamunacharya has written these works. Siddhi Traya. So there's actually, when we say Traya means 3. So Siddhi Traya means the 3 cities. So there are 3 books actually, which are included in Siddhi Traya. They deal with Ishwara. They deal with Chit, Achit, and Ishwara. They deal with the 3 subject matters of Vedanta. It means God, the souls, and the universe. So there's Siddhi Traya, which is called Samvit Siddhi, Ishwara Siddhi, Samvit Siddhi, and the other one, the third one, I forget the name of. But anyway, the Siddhi Traya, which we have almost complete form of, right? And then we have the Agama Pramanya, which is a book which tells us about the Pancharatra Agama and proves its authoritativeness. Another thing called Mahapurusha Nirnaya, the Gitartha Sangraha, which is 32 verses summarizing the contents of the Bhagavad Gita, Stotra Ratna, which is a prayer about the Lord in 65 verses, and then another Chatusloki. Chatusloki is exactly what it says. It's a prayer of 4 verses which deal with the goddess Lakshmi or goddess Shri. So in the Siddhi Traya, comprising of 3 parts, each dealing with God, the soul, and knowledge, respectively, Yamuna has made a significant contribution to Vishishtadvaita philosophy. The rest of his works have laid the foundation for the formulation of the important doctrines of Vaishnavism: the supremacy of Vishnu as the ultimate reality, the ontological status of the goddess Shri or Lakshmi, and the doctrine of Sharanagati or self-surrender. We notice here that he has translated Sharanagati as self-surrender. and also property as self-surrender. So that's fact. That's a fact. Both these words, sharanagati and property, are synonymous as self-surrender. The Agama Pramanya vindicates the authoritativeness of the Pancharatra Agamas. The Pancharatra Agamas are a series of books called Samhitas, which are generally thought to be about 200 different Samhitas, many of which are printed and some of which are still in manuscript form, which deal with the active service of Lord Vishnu in the temples and in the houses, in our deity rooms, in our puja rooms, in the houses. And so Pancharatra Agamas is a practical way of worship of Lord Vishnu, especially in the form of a deity. There's another Agama, of Vaishnava Agama, called the Vaikhanasa Agama, and we have a series on Agamas in South Indian Vaishnavism, which is a different set of videos which you can watch, and you can have a look at that if you're interested in the different forms that Vaishnava practical Vaishnava ritualism is performed. But anyway, the Pancharatra Agamas were doubted to be authoritative by acharyas by teachers like Shankaracharya. So Yamunacharya, he wrote a book specially vindicating the authoritativeness of the Pancharatra Agama, on the basis of which the theology of Vaishnavism is developed. Right. So in fact, these are the first written extant works in Sanskrit contributed by a Vaishnavacharya for the understanding of Vaishnava theology. Right. So if we look back, these are the first works written by an acharya. The other works which we see are all traditional works or classical works of the Vedas and the Itihasas and the Puranas and other ancient literature. Right. So but here we take the acharyas. The acharyas come in, basically start writing their Sanskrit commentaries and their Sanskrit books with the advent of Yamunacharya. Actually with Natamuni, but we don't have Natamuni's, we don't have the two books that Natamuni wrote. So all these have helped Ramanuja to systematize Vishishtadvaita religion and philosophy. Once again, Vishishtadvaita is a type of non-dualism which is specific, has specific aspects. There are specific aspects of non-dualism. It's a holistic type of non-dualism, right? So Vedanta itself is normally a non-dual type of philosophy where Vedanta seeks to find the underlying basis for reality, right? That the God, the souls in the universe must have some common basis. They must have something in common. Why do they have something in common? Because God has created all of them. God has created the souls in the universe. He's the origin of everything, and therefore there must be some basis between the creator and the created, right? So this is the idea of Vedanta. Now, what exactly is that basis, and how these three entities, God, the souls in the world, relate to each other? That is why there are different schools of Vedanta and different schools of Vaishnavism. So the most significant contribution of the development and propagation of Vishishtadvaita philosophy and Vaishnava religion has come by Ramanuja. Ramanuja was born at the time when Advaita Vedanta, which is the system of Vedanta which was propagated by Adi Shankaracharya, the first Shankaracharya. Advaita Vedanta, propounded by Shankara, had taken deep root in the minds of people. So 1017 CE, when Ramanuja was born, there was many people who were following Advaita Vedanta, which had been preached by Shankara previous to this. There are different ideas of when exactly Shankara was born and lived his life. Normally people think probably in the 7th or 8th centuries, CE is probably the time of Shankaracharya. So for a good couple of 100 years, Shankaracharya's philosophy had been permeating Indian society, and it had taken deep root in the minds of people, is what he's saying. So through Shankara, though Shankara himself was not anti-Vaishnava, so he was not against Vaishnavism or the worship of Vishnu. In fact, in his Gita Bhasya, he says, Narayana Pravyaktat, Narayana, the Supreme Lord Narayana is above all. So he does actually say things like that. So if we see, we can see the Shrivasya on the Vedanta Sutra on the Shairakya Bhashya, or we can see Shankara's commentary on Vedanta Sutra 2243, where he acknowledges the acceptance of the Bhagavata religion. In his commentary on the Gita and the Upanishads, he has repeatedly mentioned the high respect for Vasudeva or Narayana as the Paramatma, as the super soul. So Shankara wasn't anti-Vaishnava, right? The Mayavada advocated by him affected the ontological status of Vishnu or the personal God as Paratattva. So, in other words, it's not like he was against the worship of Vishnu. He just wasn't propagating that Vishnu is the highest reality. He was advocating that there are many gods that are the highest reality. They're all, in fact, aspects of the impersonal Brahman, which was his idea, like that. So this philosophy of Advaita is also called sometimes Mayavada. So Vada means a school of philosophy or something that somebody propagates or says. The word Vadati or Vad is the verb in Sanskrit to speak. So when we say something, we are propounding a Vad. We're saying something. So, and then Maya means illusion. Ma means not, and Ya means that in Sanskrit. So Maya means not that. So those persons who speak about that which is not or illusion, those persons are called Mayavadis, or Mayavada is their philosophy. So, but more properly, we will call it Advaita Vedanta rather than Mayavada. But Mayavada is more of a pejorative term for such persons. For Shankara, the ultimate reality is Nirguna Brahman. Now, the word Nirguna means without qualities, right? It can also mean, according to Vaishnavas, it can mean without material qualities, without bad qualities. But here it just simply means, according to Shankara, Nirguna means without any qualities whatsoever, which is very, very difficult to understand or very difficult to think about. Shankara's philosophy has some gimmicks that he uses and some ideas that he uses in order to get us to try to believe in a thing that doesn't have any attributes. So normally, if we talk about anything, everything has some sort of attribute. If I say this is a book, this book has an attribute that it's black, that it has so many pages. It has many different attributes, that it has a certain weight, right? That it's about a certain subject. So all of these things are attributes. So we never see anything in this world, even if we talk about the void, people talk about outer space as being a void. There is no such thing as a void, really, because a void has got some attribute. It has certain attributes. It has a lack of, like the outer space has a lack of oxygen, has a lack of, certain things. So when we talk about a void, we're also talking about certain aspects or certain attributes. So the word nirguna, as understood as absolutely no qualities at all, is very difficult to understand because we've never experienced any substance that doesn't have an attribute. So it is sort of beyond reasoning or beyond the mind or beyond words, at least, right? This idea of nirguna Brahman. So the idea of Shankara that there is such a thing and that actually we are in illusion and that everything is actually devoid of all concept or all attributes is a very, very difficult concept to understand. And that's why when we talk to the Advaitins, when we talk to the Mayavadis about this concept, they end up telling us anivachaniya. In Sanskrit, this term anivachaniya means it cannot be described by words. So we can't describe Nirguna Brahman by words. We've just labeled the Supreme as having absolutely no attributes, and by using the term Nirguna Brahman. And then when somebody challenges this and says, "Please explain to me what Nirguna Brahman actually means," we say, "Well, we can't really explain it because it's beyond words." So in this way, the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is somewhat nonsensical. So there are many ways that we can punch holes in their philosophy because of this. Okay, so anyway, Nirguna Brahman was the ultimate reality for Shankara. Whereas he saw Vishnu or Sriman Narayana as, or Ishvara, as we can call Sriman Narayana God, as Saguna Brahman. Okay, so here we have the difference between Shankara. Shankara does believe in a Saguna Brahman. He believes that Saguna Brahman means Sa means with. So sometimes in Sanskrit we say Sa or Saha. Saha means with. So Saguna means with qualities. So there is Brahman, or the great spirit, that has qualities, and there is the great spirit Brahman that has no qualities. So Shankara's idea is the origin of everything is the great spirit that has no qualities, and somehow or other that great spirit that has no qualities somehow gets some qualities, right? And appears in different forms that have qualities. And one of those forms that has qualities, according to Shankara, is Vishnu. Right, but there are other forms, he says, like Durga and Ganesha and Shiva, and this is his idea. So, right. So, or Ishwar, so he considers Vishnu to be simply a form of Saguna Brahman, which he considers to be lower. So he has this dual idea of reality, Shankara. Shankara says that there is what is Paramartika and there's Vyavaharika. There are two realities according to Shankara. There's a lesser reality called Vyavaharika reality. So what we see, the appearance of difference, the appearance that there are souls and God and the world, these things are all illusions. So in one sense, illusion is also a type of reality, right? When a man sees an oasis in the desert and it's an illusion, right? He actually sees something, but it's a false thing. So the illusion is real, but it's not really water. It's not really an oasis. It's an illusion. Okay. So this is what Shankara calls Vyavaharika reality. And then above that, the actual reality, which Shankara talks about, is the reality without nirguna, without any qualities whatsoever. That is called Paramartika reality, the Paramartika, the one which is Paramartika. So we can give it. There's a couple of examples that can be given to illustrate this type of theology and philosophy. For instance, when we look out across the plain, it appears that the world is flat. Even there might be some mountains like what you can see behind me. It appears that the world is basically flat, is a flat plane. And so for many years, in ancient times, some people thought that the world was actually a flat disk. But then with the advent of airplanes and even balloons and going up high going up high, if you go very high up to the highest mountains of the world, on the top of the highest mountains, you can actually see a curvature in the earth. Right? You can see that the earth is a globe. So from a high level, you can see the earth is round. From a low level, it appears to be flat. Right? So this is one example that Shankara or Advaitins or Mayavadis can give to say that there is a reality that we see now, which is actually false. If we go to the highest level, we see the real reality of the world. Right, so there's several analogies that people could use to try to explain this idea of the two realities that Shankara believes in. So anyway, from the transcendental point of view, Ishvara, or God, is less real than the absolute Brahman. So according to Shankara, Nirguna Brahman is the absolute Brahman, is the origin of everything, and is the reality. And Ishvara, or God, the personal form or the Saguna form of Brahman, of the Supreme Spirit, right, is less real according to Shankara, because it's only real in this world. It's not ultimately real in the great scheme of things. So the emphasis given to the one absolute of the Upanishad as the sole reality, and the adoption of the doctrine of Maya, or illusion, or avidya. Avidya also means ignorance. Vidya means knowledge. Avidya means ignorance. to account for the plurality of souls in the cosmic universe did not accord with the absolute, did not accord the absolute reality, did not accord absolute reality to the individual souls in cosmic matter. So in fact, what Shankara is basically saying, he says, Brahma Satyam. He says that Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, or the Supreme Spirit without any qualities whatsoever, is the truth. And the other part of his doctrine is Jagat Mithya, that the souls and the world of matter and the individual souls, that is Mithya, that is false, that is fleeting, that does not have permanent reality. That is not a permanent reality. So that's the philosophy of the Advaitins. The emphasis given to jnana or knowledge of Brahman, derived from the study of sacred text as a means of liberation, did not acknowledge upasana or bhakti. Upasana means worship. Bhakti means devotion, right? Bhakti, worship, devotional acts, right? As the direct means of moksha. So the Advaitins, whose philosophy followed Shankaracharya, had taken root at the time of Ramanuja, and basically their process for attaining liberation from this material body and this material life of repeated birth and death and suffering that we find ourselves in, because they did realize that we were in samsara, that we were in some problematic situation right now. And how to get free from that, according to the Advaitins, is by jnana, by study of the scriptures, by realization through study of all these principles that we were just talking about, that actually the Supreme is Nirguna Brahman, is the Supreme Spirit without any qualities. So that knowledge is brought about by the study of scriptures called Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is also mentioned by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, and it's mentioned in the Upanishads. The study of scriptures, right, leads to knowledge. And there's a very famous saying, Jnanat Mokshaha, or Jnanan Mokshaha. It means from knowledge. The ablative singular of jnana, jnanat, right? Jnanan Mokshaha. From knowledge comes liberation, right? So for those of you who know a little bit of Sanskrit grammar, Jnanat Mokshaha, which by Sandhi becomes Jnanan Mokshaha. Okay, so that from knowledge comes liberation. So this was Shankara's idea. Whereas Ramanuja and the Vaishnavacharyas, their idea was not from knowledge. Knowledge might be there, the scriptures. It's not that Vaishnavas are against studying the scriptures or studying philosophy, but they feel that bhakti or devotional activity and self-surrender, prapati or sharanagati, are the ways to moksha or to liberation. It was therefore, so Ramanuja came along and he began to establish that idea. It was therefore necessary for Ramanuja to criticize the teachings of Advaita Vedanta and reestablish on a sounder basis the tenets of Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta as it embedded in the Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. So this is the system. All of the different schools of thought, Vedantic schools of thought, follow this. They make commentaries on the Upanishads, the Vedanta Sutra, and the Bhagavad Gita. And Shankara was the one who systematized this system, but Ramanuja came along and he gave it a more accurate reading than Shankara. So on the religious side of the supremacy of Vishnu as the ultimate reality, the exclusive worship of Vishnu as a direct means for moksha, for liberation, and the restoration of individuality and reality of the souls, and a positive state of blissful experience in the divine realm as a goal of human life, had to be established in order to sustain the ancient teachings of Vaishnavism, which we know, we just discussed, were actually expounded in the Vedas, the Agamas, and the Puranas. Not to speak of the Idihasas. This uphill task was undertaken by Ramanuja and was executed perfectly by him through his works and through his missionary institutions, which were all started by his 74, his different apostles and saints that came after him, the 74 Simhasanadipatis, also called Acharya Purushas. Thus, Ramanuja stands as an important milestone in the history of Vaishnavism, of all Vaishnavism, not just of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, but of all Vaishnavism. Ramanuja has written 9 works: Sri Bhashya, commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, the Vedanta Deepa and Vedanta Sara, both briefer commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras. 3 commentaries on the Vedanta Sutras, Sri Bhashya being the biggest one, Vedanta Deepa being a little smaller, Vedanta Sara being the smallest one, the essence. Sara means essence. Deepa means the light on Vedanta. So Sri Bhashya means the commentary of the Sri Sampradaya, the beautiful commentary, or the commentary which includes the idea of Sriman Narayana associated with Goddess Sri Lakshmi, right? And Vedanta Deepa means the light on Vedanta, the light on the end of all knowledge. Vedanta Sara means the cream or the essence of Vedanta, or the end of all knowledge. So then he wrote Vedanta Sangraha, a consolidated presentation of his views on some important Upanishadic texts, especially texts which were dealt with by Adi Shankaracharya and how they were misunderstood. So in Vedanta Sangraha, Ramanuja explains this principle of understanding the Upanishads, that in the Upanishads, which is the philosophical part of the Vedas, there are different statements. So some of these statements indicate the oneness of the oneness of all the aspects of reality, the souls, the world, and God. Some of the texts, these are called Abheda Shrutis, right? So Shruti means a Vedic text, right? A text from the Vedas is called Shruti. The text of the other types of scriptures is called Shmiti. That which is remembered. The Vedas is that which is heard by the great rishis of ancient times. So in their meditation, they understood the eternal Shrutis, or the eternal hymns of the Vedas. So an Abheda Shruti is a part of the Vedas, a statement in the Vedas which seems to indicate that everything is one. So it talks about the oneness of all reality. Then there's another type of Shruti called a Beda Shruti. Beta Shruti. There's Abheda Shruti and Beta Shruti. Beta Shruti speaks about the differences between the souls, the God, and the world. So then there's another one called Gatika Shrutis. Gatika Shrutis are statements in the Vedas or the Upanishads which speak about the oneness, but also the difference. So simultaneously, the oneness and the difference in different aspects. So these 3 types of statements, Ramanuja says, are there in the Upanishads, and he gives examples. Whereas other acharyas, other teachers like Shankara and Madhva, who propounded Advaita and who propounded Dvaita, who propounded oneness and difference, right? It's the schools of oneness and the schools of difference, right? They have emphasized, the Advaitins have emphasized the Abheda Shrutis, and the Dvaitins have emphasized the Beta Shrutis. So the people who follow Shankaracharya, they emphasized only the parts of the Vedas that recognize oneness, and the followers of Madhva have only the parts of the Upanishad which recognize difference. Ramanuja has decried this type of cherry picking. He said, no, instead of taking only these texts and only those texts, right, and trying to support your view with only a few of the texts, take all the texts together and take the ones which talk about oneness, the ones that talk about difference, and also the ones that are ambiguous, which talk about oneness and difference, and explain all of them, and have a coherent philosophy that explains all of them, right, together. And then you'll understand the real purport of Vedanta. And that's the uniqueness of Ramanuja's view, is that he's the first person to really do that. So now, he also wrote the 3 Gadjas, which are prose lyrics expounding the doctrine of property or surrender, self-surrender to God, right? And the first Gadya, of course, is the Sharanagati Gadya, which deals with Sharanagati or property, right? And then Sri Vaikuntha Gadya and Sri Ranga Gadya, which deal with the supreme abode of Lord Vishnu, Sri Vaikuntha, and also Sri Rangam, the abode of Vishnu on earth. Excuse me. The main temple, like the Vatican of Vaishnavism in South India, Sri Rangam, the temple city. So These are all spoken of in the Gadyas. Then Gita Bhashya is a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and Nitya Grantha, which is a treatise of daily observances of Vaishnavas. In the Sri Bhashya, which is the most outstanding philosophical work of Ramanuja, presents the fundamental philosophical doctrines of Vishishta Vedanta on the basis of the interpretation of the Vedanta Sutras, which is provided by Bodhayana and other early acharyas, along with detailed explanations of the relevant Upanishadic and Smriti texts. Right? So, as I said before, he quotes, he says that all of these things were spoken of by Bodhayana before. Not just Bodhayana, but Dramita, Tanka, Harita, Karpardin. He mentions several acharyas who came before him, several saints. So the nature of the three tattvas, right? What are the three tattvas? Chit, Achit, and Ishvara. So Chit means individual consciousness, the souls. Achit means unconscious, insentient matter. And Ishvara meaning God, the controller, supporter, and creator of all of the other two. Right? So the nature of these three tattvas, which form the fundamental philosophical tenets of Vishishta Dvaita, that is, Ishvara, God, Chit, the soul, and Achit, cosmic matter, have been fully discussed, and their organic relationship in the form of the Sharira Shariri, body-soul analogy, right, is well established on the irrefutable authority of the Antaryamin Brahmana, which is a part of the Shruti, a part of the Vedas, of the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. So one of the first 8 Upanishads, one very big Upanishad is called the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. And it has a section called the Antaryami Brahmana, in which this idea of the relationship between God, the souls, and the world is explained with an analogy like the body and soul analogy. So Ishvara, God, is considered to be the soul of the souls and the world. The souls of the world are considered to be the body of God. Right. So this is the basic tenet of Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta. The doctrine of bhakti, which is termed as upasana or worship in the Upanishads, as a direct means or sadhana. Sadhana means a means, or upaya, we say sometimes. Sadhana means the method by which we attain something. So in this case, liberation or moksha. The sadhana for moksha, right, is discussed in detail. So the idea is that bhakti, or devotional activity, right, is considered to be an upasana or a method or path to liberation. The nature of moksha, right, so both these things, property and bhakti, are considered upayas. They're considered to be means to liberation. Whereas Shankara previously was speaking about jnana yoga, jnana being knowledge, the cultivation of knowledge of the scriptures as the only or main means to liberation. So the nature of moksha, the supreme goal of human life, is also presented on the basis of Upanishadic authority. Now, the Gita Bhashya is equally an important work in which, apart from establishing the supremacy of Vasudeva, the same as Vishnu or Narayana, as the Paratattva, as the supreme principle, the topmost principle, the details for moksha are brought, the details of bhakti yoga, aided by karma yoga and jnana yoga as a sadhana for moksha, are brought out. Because what happens in the Gita is that Lord Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, he's explaining to him about bhakti yoga and property and surrender as means to liberation. But he's saying bhakti yoga, he starts out not by talking about bhakti yoga or property, but he starts out by talking about karma yoga and jnana yoga. So karma yoga, the process of work, and jnana yoga, the process of knowledge, right, are considered to be aids to bhakti yoga. They help us to perform bhakti yoga. So we should have, you can't perform bhakti yoga or acts of devotion if you don't know anything about the thing that you're being devoted to. If you don't know about God, if you don't know about the processes of devotion, right? If there's no knowledge, then you can't perform bhakti. So there can't be proper acts of devotion without some knowledge of the scriptures. There can also be proper devotional actions without action. So karma is the karma yoga is the yoga of action. So there has to be action and there has to be knowledge in bhakti yoga. So knowledge and action are the things which support bhakti. So karma yoga and jnana yoga are the aids to bhakti yoga given by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita to the sadhana of bhakti yoga, for moksha. And of course, property comes at the very end of the Gita in the 18th chapter, verse 66, where Lord Krishna explains that one can give up all of these paths of effort, right? The effort of karma yoga, the effort of jnana yoga, the effort of doing acts, and the effort of attaining knowledge of the scriptures. And one can simply surrender oneself to the Lord. And that also works. That's also a separate path, understood by the Sri Vaishnavas as a separate path to liberation, or a separate upaya or sadhana. Now, other forms of Vaishnavism include that into bhakti yoga. Why not? Why not include self-surrender also as a part of doing those devotional acts? And in fact, all Vaishnavas perform devotional acts. It's just that whether we perform those devotional acts as the actual sadhana or upaya, or the means to liberation, or whether we perform those devotional acts at the same time as being surrendered to the Supreme Lord through the process of property or sharanagati, right, which is actually the means by which we attain liberation. It really, from the point of view of people looking from outside, it doesn't make that much difference because all the Vaishnavas are doing the same activities. But the slightly different understanding amongst the different Vaishnava sampradayas as to whether sharanagati or property, self-surrender, is included within bhakti or is separate from bhakti. So anyway, this comes out in different commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, because in the Bhagavad Gita, all these things, karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, and property and self-surrender, sharanagati, are all explained. So their relationship is brought out by the different commentators on the Bhagavad Gita. So here is just saying that karma yoga, that Ramanuja explains how karma yoga and jnana yoga help bhakti yoga. They're necessary for bhakti yoga to go on, and for bhakti yoga to become a sadhana to reach liberation or moksha. The theory of avatara or incarnation of Vishnu is fully stressed on the basis of Gita verses. So the idea is that Vishnu is not only the supreme principle, the topmost principle, but he's not only transcendental to us, he's there in the topmost position, but he's also immanent in that he can take his avatar, he can take a form and descend amongst us. So this is explained also in the Bhagavad Gita. If we look at the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, we see how there are certain verses in the Gita. Paritranaya sadhudam vinashaya chuduskutam dharma samstapanataya sambhavam yuke. So in the Gita, Lord Krishna actually defines the role that the avatar or the descent, when he descends to this world in different forms, what that should be like. And he says that I come to destroy the miscreants, those people who are against God. I come to protect my devotees, my followers, the people who are surrendered and who love me and who worship me. And I come to establish the principles of religion. And I come millennium after millennium to do that. So this is one of the verses that establishes the idea of the avatar, of the descent of God, because there are some religions in this world, like for instance, like some of the Semitic religions, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, where they say that God is the supreme. He created everything. And they're more deistic in their outlook. Well, deism means that God created everything and he got the ball rolling, but he doesn't he doesn't have an active role here in this material world. He doesn't come here in a personal form. So, in fact, this will be decried usually by the Semitic religions like Islam. They can't believe that there can be any form of God here in this material world, and they're completely against that. They're in fact iconoclasts, and they'll destroy deities and forms. Any form of God, anything which is considered to be a form of God, is wrong for them, is limiting to them, limiting the power of God to say that he can come in a particular form. Christianity, where they say, maybe he descends as his son, or he comes as Jesus, and he comes at one time, or might come once or twice, but he's not always there. And then the Jews, which talk about the Old Testament, where God may have appeared to them in ancient times in the form of a burning bush or an ethereal voice or something, but he doesn't show up anymore. He's got other things to do apparently, and doesn't come to this world as an imminent avatar or incarnation. So this theory, this idea of the avatar of Vishnu, the avatars of Vishnu, specifically 10 avatars are spoken about as most important, is coming and is explained in a philosophical way in the Gita. So in fact, the fuller presentation of Avatar Rahasya, or the secrets of the different descents of the Lord, is found only in the Gita Bhashya. So if we want to explain about this, now there are some other cults, some other religions, some other theologies in India that have also tried to take this idea of avatarship, and they've said, okay, there are different avatars of Shiva, there are different avatars of Devi, but really the original philosophy of the idea of an avatar is coming from Vaishnavism and is found here in the Bhagavad Gita, the Avatar Rahasya. The doctrine of property is also briefly mentioned briefly while commenting on the 66th verse of the last chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So the verse 1866 is known as the Charama Sloka of Lord Krishna. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami masuchaha is the verse. And briefly, it speaks in the Bhagavad Gita about property or sharanagati, self-surrender. The Vedanta Sangraha, continuing on, after the Gita Bhashya, let's talk about the Vedanta Sangraha, which devoted to an exposition of the philosophy of the Upanishad, contains the Vishishtadvaita views on Tattva, reality, Hita, the means or the upaya, and Purushartha, the supreme goal of life, which is moksha, right, or liberation, in the form of an active relationship of service to the Supreme Lord in Sri Vaikuntha. Besides the supremacy of Vishnu, the doctrine of Nitya Vibhuti, the fact that there is an idea that there is a supreme place where Sriman Narayana, Lord Vishnu Vasudeva, lives or exists in an eternal form, which we can worship, right? This is the doctrine of Nitya Vibhuti. So these are the subject matters of Vedanta Sangraha, a book called Vedanta Sangraha. The three Gadjas, the Sharanagati Gadya, Sriranga Gadya, and Vaikuntha Gadya, expound in detail the theological doctrine of Sharanagati and the numerous attributes of God. The Nitya Grantha sets out the daily observance of Vaishnavas, as enjoined in sacred texts, along with the mode of worship of God. Thus, for the first time in the history of Vaishnavism, we get a comprehensive and authoritative account of its philosophy, theology, and ethical discipline. So not just the philosophy, but also practical means to perform, to live our lives according to that philosophy. Development of Vaishnavism in the post-Ramanuja period. So this is all of, so we've discussed now about Nathamuni, Munacharya, and Ramanuja, what the so-called Munitraya, the three great Munis of Vaishnavism, of the beginning of Vaishnavism. So now development of Vaishnavism in the post-Ramanuja period. So after Ramanuja, there was also continued development of Vaishnavism. The post-Ramanuja period, so Ramanuja lived for traditionally for 120 years, from 1017 CE to 1137 CE. So the post-Ramanuja period witnessed the further growth of Vaishnavism through three successive stages. The first one extended for the period of 2 centuries after Ramanuja to the advent of Vedanta Deshika and Pillai Lokacharya, who were contemporaries. So Vedanta Deshika was a great teacher whose books are the inspiration for the northern school of Sri Vaishnavism, called the Vadagalais, and Pilokacharya and Manavala Mamuni, who came after him. Their works are considered to be the inspiration for the southern acharyas, or the Sri Rangamacharyas, called the Tengalais. So we have the Kanchipuram acharyas who follow Vedanta Deshika, and the Sri Rangamacharyas who follow Pilokacharya and Manavala Mamuni. The second stage covers. Okay, so that was the first stage. So the first stage will be the 200 years after Ramanuja. Those 200 years, the consolidation of the understanding of Ramanuja's points, right, up to the point of Vedanta Deshika and Pilokacharya. That's the first stage. The second stage covers the life period and their life period, the life period of Vedanta Deshika and Pilokacharya. And the third stage refers to the post-Vedanta Deshika period, extending through 6 centuries. Right? During the first stage, a few immediate disciples of Ramanuja and his later successors expounded the teachings of their spiritual leader faithfully through oral discourses and writings which were in the nature of glossaries on Ramanuja's works. An interesting feature of the literature that grew up during this period is that it was written in a popular style known as Mani Pravala. So Mani Pravala literally means pearl, Mani, and coral, Pravala. Just as the two are strung together alternatively to form a beautiful necklace, Sanskrit words are intermixed with Tamil words to form a Sanskritized type of Tamil prose. Right? So that is Mani Pravala. And this is a liturgical language which is only really used by the medieval Sri Vaishnava acharyas from the time of Ramanuja. So, it's a Tamil language interspersed with Sanskrit words or Sanskritized Tamil prose, therefore easier to understand by persons not too well versed in Sanskrit. These works are mostly in the form of commentaries or vyakyanas on some of the important works of Yamuna and Ramanuja, and more importantly, the Tamil hymns of the Alwars. It was for the first time that a commentary was written on the hymns of the Alwars by Kurukesh, also known as Pilan, the closest disciple of Ramanuja, under the latter's direction. So the first commentary that we have on the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, right? Remember that the Nalaya Divya Prabandham is 4,000 verses. So a commentary on that is more than 4,000 verses. A commentary, this commentary was called Arayira Padi. So Padi means verse. Ayira means 1,000. Ara means 6. So Ara Ayira means 6,000 Padi verses. So this commentary titled Arayira Padi, which literally means a work of 6,000 units or gruntas or verses. A grunta, okay, so what's a grunta? A grunta, sometimes called a shloka in Sanskrit, but here it's called a grunta. A grunta consists of 32 syllables. So sometimes we see it in 4 lines of 8 syllables or 2 lines of 16 syllables. And anybody that's read any Sanskrit, they'll understand that this is called shlokamita or anustup, It's a very, very common poetic meter which is used in Sanskrit. So here, these commentaries were put forward in granthas, in these different verses, like that. And so he wrote a commentary, this Kudukeshan, who also known as Pilan, right, who was a disciple of Ramanuja, had wrote this commentary on the first commentary on the Nalaya Divyapabandham of the Alwars, the 4,000 Tamil hymns of the Alwars. He wrote 6,000 verses as the first commentary. This marks the beginning of the popularization of the teachings of the Alwars, right? So, of course, everybody before this time, during the time of Ramanuja, everybody knew they knew the hymns of the Alwars because the hymns of the Alwars had been rediscovered by Natha Muni, who was the grandfather of Ramanuja's Param Guru. Ramanuja's guru was Periyanambi or Mahapurna, but Mahapurna's guru was Alavandar or Yamunacharya. Each one of them has a Tamil name and a Sanskrit name, at least one Tamil name and Sanskrit name, right? And so basically, Natha Muni was the grandfather of Ramanuja's Param Guru, right? So from that time, they had all the 4,000 hymns of the Alwars, which had been rediscovered by Natha Muni directly from Nam Alwar. And so they used to chant. Ramanuja instructed them to use that chanting, and not even Natha Muni and Yamuna got people in the different temples to use the chanting of the Alwars hymns in the worship of the temple. In fact, in Sri Rangam, there is one festival called the Vaikuntha Ekadasi festival, which is also called Adhyayanotsava. And Adhyayana means study. Adhyayana used to be in the Gurukulas, people would sit and recite the verses of the Vedas that they knew to memorize them. So Adhyayana means the recitation of verses. It also means study. So it means recitation of verses. So this Adhyayana Utsava, which means the Adhyayana Utsava, the festival of Adhyayana, of repetition of the verses, is the Vaikuntha Ekadasi festival. It spans 21 days every year in around December, January, where the Sri Vaishnavas go in front of Lord Ranganatha in Sri Rangam, and they chant all 4,000 of the songs of the Alwars from the beginning to the end over 21 days. That is called Adhyayanotsava, and that was introduced by Ramanuja to the temple liturgy, the sacerdotal calendar, the liturgical calendar of Sri Rangam temple. And it's now performed in other temples also, of course, because Sri Rangam is the paradigmatic temple of Sri Vaishnavism. It's the Vatican of Sri Vaishnavism. So this marks the beginning of the popularization of the teachings of the Alwars. Now, Pilan's commentary was followed up by many more detailed commentaries. So there are other commentaries of which we're going to talk about here. So Nanjir, 1182 CE. Nanjir is a disciple of, he's a sannyasi, as the word Jia means sannyasi. Nan means hour. Right, so this is a nickname that was given to him by his guru, who was Parashara Bhatta. Parashara Bhatta was one of the two sons, the twin sons, Vedavyasa Bhatta and Parashara Bhatta, the twin sons of Kuresha, who was the main disciple of Ramanuja. So after Ramanuja, the next acharya is Govinda or Embar in Tamil, who is Ramanuja's cousin. And then after Embar, Parashara Bhatta was the next acharya after that. He is known as the priest or the guru of Sri Rangesha Purohitaha. It says in his pranam mantra that he was the Purohit of Sri Ranganatha. So Parashara Bhatta. Now Parashara Bhatta had a disciple who initially was a Mayavadi, was initially an Advaitin, and he was living in Melkoti in Karnataka, a place where Ramanuja had been exiled for 10 years or 14 years or whatever. And this person's name was Vedanti, and he was feeding many Brahmins, but he was also disputing, having disputes, arguments with different people and defeating them based on Advaita Vedanta. So Parashurabhata heard about this famous person. He went there and he disputed with him and he defeated him. When he defeated this person, Vedanti, he became his disciple. He became Parashurabhata's disciple. But he took sannyas and he became known as Nanjir. So Nanjir wrote a commentary called Om Pati Patin Ayira Padi. So Om Pati means 9. Pati means 10. Pat means 10. Om Pati means 1 before 10 in Tamil. So Om Pati means 9. Om Pati Ayira Padi means the 9,000. Ayira, remember, means 1,000. Om Pati Ayira Padi means the 9,000. So the first commentary on the 4,000 verses was the 6,000. The second commentary was the 9,000. So they're all, many of them have these names according to the number of verses that are in them. These are commentaries on Nalaya. So this 9,000 was a commentary on the Tiruvai. Now Tiruvai is one section, only one section of Nalaya Divyaprabandham, only the 1,112, I believe, verses by Namalwar. So Namalwar has written several different works, but his main work, his magnum opus, is the Tiruvai. And Tiruvai, since the Nalaya Divyaprabandha, the 4,000 works of the Tamil Vedas, they're equated to the Vedic scriptures. So when people equate them to the Vedas, they equate Tiruvai, which is a section of Nalaya Divyaprabandham, to a section of the Vedas called the Samaveda. So it's equated to the Samaveda, the Tiruvai. And it's the most important section of the Nalaya Divyaprabandham. It's the magnum opus. It's the greatest work of Namalwar, who was considered the head of the Alwars. Okay, so Nanjir wrote a commentary of 9,000 verses called the Om Patinayira Padi, right, on Tiruvai of Namalwar. He was followed by Periyavachan Pillai. Now, Periyavachan Pillai, those of you who are interested in the teachings of Periyavachan Pillai, you can see another playlist on this YouTube channel where you can go and you can see the commentary on Stotra Ratna, the 65 verses of Alavandar or Yamunacharya about the Lord, right, with a commentary by Periyavachan Pillai. And those lectures are being are there on the YouTube channel with the explanation of the Mani Pravala by Dr. Archir Narayana. So in Sri Rangam. So he was followed. Nanji was followed by Periyavachan Pillai. So now we're talking about, after Ramanuja, we're talking about these different acharyas that came along. So we have Nanjir, we have Periyavachan Pillai, right? So Periyavachan Pillai was 1228 CE. So who for the first time wrote commentaries on all 4,000 hymns. So apparently the 6,000, the original 6,000 by Kurukesh Pilan, who was a close disciple of Ramanuja, did not cover all the 4,000 hymns. Then later on, Nanjir wrote 9,000 slokas, which was a commentary only on the Tiruvai, which is only 1,000, basically 1,110 or 12 hymns. And then Periyavachan Pillai, he was the first one. He was the first acharya to write a commentary on all 4,000 hymns. Right. So another important contribution was made in Mani Pravala literature by Vaduka Tiruvidi Pillai. Vaduka Tiruvidi Pillai. So it's a big mouthful. Vadaku means north. Tiruvidi, the word Vidi in Tamil means street. A Tiruvidi is a holy street because the word Tiru means Shri or Lakshmi in Tamil. So a beautiful street or a holy street, right? And usually we will say the streets around a temple are called a Tiruvidi. So if you go to Sri Rangam, there are several streets that are around the temple that are still within the main temple. The 7 walls of Sri Rangam, there are some streets within the temple, right? So those are called Tiruvidis. So they are usually laid out in a square pattern. So you have the North Street, the South Street, the West Street, the East Street, right? For instance, if you go to Sri Rangam, my house is in the East Street. It's in the what we call the we have Vadaka, we have Tenka, and we have the East. So I'm just forgetting the word for East in Tamil right now. But anyway, here we have a person called Vadaka Tiruvidi Pillai. So Pillai means son. The word Pillai actually means son in Tamil, but it's a respectful term for somebody, right? For a person, right? So he's called the son who was from the North Street, the North Temple Street. So apparently he lived in the North Temple Street. Now, we're not sure exactly which North Street we're talking about here. Is it a North Street of the Sri Rangam temple? Some people may say so. Or is it the Northern Street of some other temple? So some people also say it's the North Street of some other temple, but we don't know exactly which North Street we're talking about. But this obviously was not his actual name, but this was the title which was given to him, Vadaka Tiruvidi Pillai. Okay, so he lived in 1217 CE, and he wrote an elaborate and scholarly commentary on Tiruvaimoli. Again, Tiruvaimoli, the magnum opus, the greatest work, over 1,000 verses by Namalwa. So this was entitled the Mupati Ayirapadi. Mupati Ayirapadi. Now, Mupati means 30. Mupati means, I'm sorry, Mupati means 36. Mupati Ayira, so 36,000. It's called the 36,000. So now this is a real mouthful, the Mupati Ayirapadi. Mupati Ara, excuse me, Mupati Ara. So Mupati means 30. I was correct. Mupati means 30. Mupati Ara, because remember Ara means 6. So Mupati Ara means 36. Mupati Ara Ayirapadi. So the 36,000, because it has 36,000 verses. Now, because that's a big, long mouthful, this commentary later on became famous. It's a famous commentary, and it's most scholarly and elaborate commentary on Tiruvaimoli by Vadaka Tiruvidi Pillai. Just like you, many people get tripped up on the very long Tamil words. Okay, so it was shortened. The name of it it's referred to usually by people as the Edu. Okay, so there's a footnote here, so I'll just explain about it. The word Edu means equal to or similar. So since this work is considered similar to the Shruta Prakashika, now the detailed commentary of Sudarshana Suri on Ramanuja Srivasya. So at the time, just before and co-equal time of Vedanta Deshika and Pila Lokacharya, there was a great scholar called Sudarshana Suri. Sudarshana Suri means a devotee, right? We get that word in the Rig Veda, Pasyanti Surayaha. The Surayaha, the devotees, the eternal devotees in Vaikuntha, they are seeing Lord Vishnu always. Sada Pasyanti Surayaha. So Suri. Surayaha is the plural of Suri, right? Those of you who know a little bit of Sanskrit grammar, you'll know that if you get a word a masculine word ending in I, like Hari 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 Harayaha. So Suri Suri Surayaha. Surai, so Sada Pasenti Surayaha. Surayaha means the Suris, the great devotees. So the greater eternal devotees in Vaikuntha, they always see Lord Vishnu. That is the meaning of that verse in the Rig Veda, which we've heard quoted before when we discussed about Lord Vishnu mentioned in the Vedas. So this Sudarshana Suri, there was a great acharya called Sudarshana, right? Sudarshana is the chakra weapon of the Lord, right? The discus weapon of the Lord, right? So his name was Sudarshana Suri. And he wrote a commentary, a sub-commentary, an elaboration of the Shrivasya of Ramanuja. So Ramanuja wrote his commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, and then following his commentary, this Acharya, Sudarshana Suri, wrote an extra commentary on the commentary of Ramanuja. And that is called Shrita Prakashika. That's the most famous commentary on the Shrivasya that we have, the commentary on Ramanuja's commentary. Right, so that's by Sudarshana Suri. He was at the same time as Pilalokacharya and Vedanta Deshika. Unfortunately, I mean, his commentary was handed down to Vedanta Deshika, who saved it and also saved his two sons. But the author himself was killed by during the time of the Muslim invasions. There were two Muslim invasions of Sri Rangam, and one of the Muslim invasions that this great scholar was killed, right? Sudarshana Suri. Anyhow, so the Edu, written by Vadakatira Vidi Pillai, this commentary on the Tiruvaimoli Moli of Namalwar in 36,000 verses, called the Mupatti Ara Ayira Padi, right? Which is called Edu for short, right? Which is a very, very important and secret, elaborate scholarly commentary on Tiruvaimoli Moli, right? This is considered equal to the Shrita Prakashika. So where Shrita Prakashika is elaborating on the Shrivasya and the Vedanta Sutras, the Sanskrit Vedas, the Edu is elaborating on the Tamil Vedas of the Alvars. You understand? So all these works in Manipavala style help considerably to popularize the teachings of Vaishnavism, thereby establishing the claim of Ubhaya Vedanta for the Vishishtadvaita. So Ubhaya Vedanta, the two types of Vedanta, the two types of ultimate knowledge, the Tamil ultimate knowledge of the saints, the Alvar saints, and the Sanskrit ultimate knowledge of the Rishis of the Vedas and the Upanishads. So this is a system that was started in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, a system of Sanskrit knowledge, Sanskrit learning of the scriptures, and also vernacular Tamil learning, the learning of in the language of the people. So this is also leads to the popularization of Vaishnavism, when it's not just in the scholarly language of Sanskrit, but it's also in the language of the people, Tamil in this case. So the Ubhaya Vedanta signifies that the system of Ramanuja is based on the Upanishads, the Vedanta expounded in Sanskrit language, and the Tamil hymns of the Alvars, which are accorded the status of revealed scriptures or Veda among Sri Vaishnavas. The Nalaya Divya Prabandham are considered to be equal to the Vedas, insofar as they contain the teachings of the Upanishads. We can actually look at the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, and we can find teachings of the Upanishads reflected in the mystical outpourings of the Alvars in the Nalaya Divya Prabandham, right? And we could also mention here, it's just like very similar to like how the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they see the philosophy of the Vedas, right, there in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Bhagavat Purana, which is very sacred, of course, to all Vaishnavas, but especially to Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So they say that instead of a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, all we need to do is read the Bhagavat Purana. The Puranas are meant to explain the Upanishads, they're meant to explain the Vedas. We all accept that. And the Bhagavat Purana especially well explains the philosophy of the Upanishads, and therefore the first verse of the Bhagavat Purana explains the Gayatri Mantra of the Vedas. The rest of the Bhagavat Purana can explain all the different Upanishadic teachings of the Upanishads. Nice. So we see this sometimes. We see that people will say this scripture explains that scripture. So here we have the Sri Vaishnavas saying the Nalaya Divya Prabandha, which is in Tamil, which everybody in Sri Rangam knows, which everyone in the society of Vaishnavas in Tamil Nadu, they understand that language. So by by reading this, instead of having to learn Sanskrit and becoming a scholar in Sanskrit, the regular normal people in the vernacular language Tamil could understand the philosophy of the Vedas, because the Nalaya Divya Prabandha explained the philosophy of the Vedas, but in their own language. So it's very important in Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism is very egalitarian in the sense that it's not exclusivist. It doesn't say that only the Brahmins, only the people who know Sanskrit, the learned Brahmins, can have the knowledge of God, but everybody can have the knowledge of God, even the people who don't know the scholarly language, the people who know the vernacular language, whatever that language may be. So Vaishnavism is open to being taught in vernacular languages, right? This is the greatness of Vaishnavism and how it spread, right? So similarly, we find that once Vaishnavism is put into English or into other languages in India, like Hindi, right? For the Tulsi Ramayana, for instance, the Hindi Ramayana, the Kamba Ramayana in Tamil, like that, it becomes more accessible to the people because it's in a vernacular language. So this is how Vaishnavism is spread. It is spread because it was translated, and it wasn't just kept by the Brahmins, because the Sanskrit-knowing Brahmin scholars had a tendency sometimes to try to keep everything very secret and keep everything in the scholarly language of Sanskrit, at which most people didn't have access to because they didn't know, right? So when things got translated into vernacular languages, then they could be spread more widely amongst the people in general, and not just amongst scholarly Brahmins. Okay. So during this period, a few important works in Sanskrit were also composed. So remember, the specific commentary language that was being used by the Sri Vaishnavacharyas at this time was Manipavala. So it was a mixture of Tamil with some Sanskrit jargon mixed in. Just like when we're talking, when we're speaking about Vaishnavism, we put in different words like bhakti and prapati and Vishnu and Narayana. These are all Sanskrit words, but because we begin to know them, even in English today, we have the word guru. We know what guru means. We know what pandit means. We know what yoga means. These words are Sanskrit words, but they've come into the English language. So we can now use them in English, and people in general in English-speaking people understand them. Even other languages like that. If I go to Spain, or if I go to France, or if I go to Italy and I say yoga, people know what yoga is, even though it's a Sanskrit word. So this Manipabala is not anything special in the sense that it's just simply Sanskrit jargon, Sanskrit words, which are being filled in, the sentences are being filled in with Tamil. Like that. So everybody could understand the concepts. During this period, a few important works in Sanskrit were composed. So it doesn't mean that Sanskrit scholarship didn't also exist, and that people were not also creating things in Sanskrit, in pure Sanskrit. So were composed both as independent treatises and commentaries. So there are different books written by acharyas. So one type of book will be a commentary. It will be an elaboration of a previous acharya's book or an original scripture. It'll be a commentary on Ramayana or Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishad, or it'll be a commentary on the commentary of some other acharya on those works. So there are commentaries, and then there are independent treatises. So the Sri Vaishnavacharyas, they wrote some independent books as well. Some of the Rahasya Granthas that we know, Rahasya Trayasarma, Vedanta Deshika, Tattvatrayam, Artha Panchagam, Mumukshapadi. There are many books. There are many books. We can talk about, for instance, Yadindra Madhadipika later on is a book in Sanskrit. It was not written in Manipavala, whereas many of the other books were written in Manipavala. So some were written in Sanskrit, some in Manipavala. These have thrown light on specific topics of Vaishnava theology. The Sri Stava is a prayer of Srivat Sanka Mishra, and the Sri Gunaratna Kosha of Parashara Bhatta. the commentary of Nanjir on Sri Suktam of the Rig Veda. So remember Nanjir, Parashara Bhatta we know, Srivat Sankabhistra is Kuresha, right, is the main disciple of Ramanuja. So he wrote a Sanskrit prayer to Sri Devi or Lakshmi called Sri Stava. The Sri Gunaratna Kosha of Parashara Bhatta, which talks about also the qualities of Sri Devi. He also wrote, Parashara Bhatta also wrote Bhagavad Gunadarpanam, which is his commentary on the Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu, because this is also a very famous part of the Itihasa Mahabharata, the epic Mahabharata, which is considered a great scripture with Ramayana. The two epics are great scriptures. So Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, all the different acharyas, all the different Vaishnava sects have also written not only on the Upanishads, not only on Bhagavad Gita, not only on the Vedanta Sutras, but also commentaries on Vishnu Sahasranama, which is a very important part of Mahabharata, along with the Bhagavad Gita. So Parashara Bhatta is the one in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. In his Bhagavad Gunadarpanam, he has given a commentary on the 1,000 names of Vishnu, the Vishnu Sahasranam, and explained each name in terms of Vedanta, in terms of Upanishadic philosophy. It's a very, very, very interesting book. So the commentary of Nanjir on Sri Suktam. Sri Suktam, beginning Hiranyavarnam Harinim, is a prayer. Sri Suktam is a prayer about Lakshmi, the consort, the divine eternal consort of the Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana, which comes from the Rig Veda. It comes from an appendix of the Rig Veda, a Kila section of the Rig Veda. Kila means appendix of the Rig Veda. And so Nanjir wrote a commentary in Sanskrit, which we have on that, on Sri Suktam. And the commentary of Periyavachan Pillai on the Chatusloki. Remember, Chatusloki is a prayer by Yamunacharya, right? Alavandar. So Yamunacharya wrote these four slokas on Goddess Lakshmi. So Periyavachan Pillai has written a commentary on that in Sanskrit. Has expounded for the first time the doctrine of Goddess Shri in Vaishnavism. Right. So all of these are important. What? Sri Stava, Sri Gunaratna Kosha, right? Sri Shukta and Chatusloki, right, are all prayers about Lakshmi, are all prayers about Sri Devi. And they were written by Srivat Sankabhisra Kuresha, right? Parashara Bhatta, right? Nanjir, and Periyavachan Pillai. So these commentators that we talked about, and they were all written in Sanskrit. So for the first time, the doctrine of the goddess Shri in Vaishnavism and her importance came to light because of these commentators, and rightly so. They have made all their commentaries on all these prayers in Sanskrit to start with. But then later on, of course, there's been plenty written about the goddess Shri also in Manipavala and in vernacular languages. So similarly, the four other lyrics of Srivat Sankirtan Mishra, right? So now there are five prayers which are very, very important, and they're called Panchastava. So the first one is called Sri Stava by Srivat Sankabhisra, which is Kuresha, right? You notice Kuresha he has a beard. He's the one of Ramanuja's disciple, the main disciple of Ramanuja, and he always has a beard. He's always seen with a beard. So Srivat Sankabhisra are called. So the other four of the five prayers by him, right? There are five prayers by him called Panchastava, which are five very important texts philosophically and also to be known by Sri Vaishnavas, right? Are called Ati Manusha Stava, Varadaraja Stava, Vaikuntha Stava, and Sundara Bahu Stava. So these are the five. So Sri Stava, Ati Manusha Stava, Varadaraja Stava, Vaikuntha Stava, and Sundara Bahu Stava. Like that. So in fact, we studied all of these when we did our degree at the university in Vaishnavism at the Madras University. These are very important to be studied. Right. So the Bhagavad Guna Darpanam, yeah, so he's mentioning now Bhagavad Guna Darpanam of Parasara Bhatta, which is a commentary again on Vishnu Sahasranam, 1,000 names of Vishnu coming in Mahabharata. The commentaries of Perivachan Pillai on Ramanuja's Gadya. So Ramanuja's Gadyas, right, the Sharanagati Gadya, the Vaikuntha Gadya, and Sri Ranga Gadya, have got Sanskrit commentaries by Perivachan Pillai. And Yamuna's Stotra Ratna, which I said we have now just finishing studying with Dr. Tirunarayana, the commentary by Perivachan Pillai on Yamuna's Stotra Ratna, 65 verses on the Supreme Lord, provide a detailed exposition of the supremacy of Vishnu and his attributes. So these other four, the first we talked about a bunch of Sanskrit commentaries that were written by acharyas, right, on goddess Lakshmi and the doctrine of Lakshmi in Sri Vaishnavism. Now we're talking about the supremacy of Vishnu and his attributes, which were spoken of by these acharyas in these particular commentaries. So the commentaries on Quresha's or Srivat Sankar Mishra's other four hymns, Ati Manusha Stava, Variraj Stava, Vaikuntha Stava, Sundara Bahu Stava. The commentaries on the Bhagavad Guna Darpana by Parasara Bhatta on Vishnu Sahasranam. The commentaries of Perivachan Pillai on the three Gadyas, right? Sharanagati Gadya, Vaikuntha Gadya, and Sri Ranga Gadya. And the commentaries by Perivachan Pillai on Stotra Ratna. Right? These are all in Sanskrit, and these are all in Sanskrit or a little bit of Mani Pravala here, a little bit of a mixture, right? On the supremacy of Vishnu and his attributes, right? Then the Shruta Prakashika, which is the learned commentary, this is also in Sanskrit, right? On Ramanuja's Sri Bhashya, was written by Sudarshana Suri in this period, has provided a solid foundation for the Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta, right? So we're talking now, that was the first period after Ramanuja, the first 200 years after Ramanuja, right? So development of Vaishnavism during the period of Vedanta Deshika and Pila Lokacharya. This is the second period here. So I think that's enough for today. And are there any questions about the literature and the presentation or the contribution by the Muni Traya? First of all, by the Muni Traya, by Nata Muni, Munacharya, Ramanuja, and their works and their history. Then by the acharyas coming after them, right, in the next 200 years, because that's what we covered. We covered Nata Muni, Yamunacharya, Ramanuja, and we covered the other commentators like Nanjia, Perivachan Pillai, Pilan, Kurukeshna Pilan, Srivat Sankar Mishra, Quresha, Parasara Bhatta, Nanjir, Perivachan Pillai, Vadakatira Vidi Pillai. Who else did we cover? Perivachan Pillai, yeah. So we covered all of those. That's the 200 years after Ramanuja. So we covered before Ramanuja up to after Ramanuja, 200 years.
I wanted to ask about the Shri Stava. And of course, it's very interesting, these 5 important prayers, which he says Sanskrit with a little bit of Mani Pravala mixed.
Well, no, those 5 prayers are in Sanskrit, but I'm saying that some of the commentaries in Mani Pravala, yeah.
Which you said you studied the Shri Stava when you did your Vaishnavism degree.
Well, we studied Panchastava, all 5.
Panchastava, perfect. Yeah. So I wanted to find out, since this is written by Quresha, it's Quresha, you said, SD. So I wanted to find out, is it the doctrines from the Tengalai view on Shri, is it not perfectly explained there? And it, like how the Tengalai see it? And if it is that the Tengalai see it like that and it's written by Ramanuja's topmost disciple, then why is there any doubt, about her ontological position? That's basically what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, why, we had all of those. We had, what did we have? We had all of those things about, we could go into, let's just have a look again here quickly, right? The exposition on Shri. So he's saying the Shri Stava, the Shri Gunaratnakosha of Parashara Bhatta, the commentary on Shri Sukta by Nanjir, and the commentary on Chatusloki by Perivachan Pillai, right? These are all about Goddess Shri, right? So we should, if we really want to understand Goddess Shri, we should start with Chatusloki, right? Because Chatusloki is by Alavanda, by Yamunacharya, right? So he's the earliest acharya. Usually if you want to study a subject in Vaishnavism, you want to try and find the earliest understanding of it or the earliest exposition of it and study that. Yeah. And then when you work historically towards the present day and see how the ideas have developed. So I would start with Chatusloki commentary, Perivachan Pillai's commentary on Chatusloki. The next thing I would do is then you could talk about Sri Stava by Kuresha, and then Sri Gunaratnakosha by Parashara Bhatta, and then Sri Sukta commentary by Nanjir, in that order. Yeah, but I mean, we could ask Tirunarayan to do it for sure. He would be interested in expounding on Chatusloki. For sure by Yamunacharya with Perivachan Pillai's commentary. There's probably commentaries by Vedanta Deshika also on all these things. So the thing is, one thing that we can do if we want to understand a little bit more about Shri is we can go to, if we want to understand the Wadagalai's ideas and the Tengalai's ideas and how they're different on the goddess Shri. So if we go to Rahasya Trayasaram, for example, Vedanta Deshika will quote from Vishnu Purana. He'll quote from Vishnu Purana about the all-expansive nature, the all-pervasiveness of Goddess Shri, right? But then you have other people, the Tengalai Acharyas will say, yes, she's all-pervasive, but how is she all-pervasive? So then the discussion becomes whether she is Swarupa Vyapti or Guna Vyapti, whether she is all pervasive. Vyapaka means to be all pervasive. So Vyapti means pervasive, right? All pervasive. So Swarupa Vyapti, is she all pervasive in her initial form, Is her initial form seen everywhere? Does her initial form expand, right? Unlimitedly. Or is she all pervasive by her Dharma Adbhuta Jnana, right? By her inherent knowledge of what's going on everywhere. Just like every other Nitya, every other eternal soul in Vaikuntha, right, has got unlimited knowledge. The souls in Vaikuntha, they know everything that's going on everywhere. They have their knowledge is totally expanded, right? There's nothing covering their knowledge. There's no ignorance there. There's no ajnana. There's no avidya. There's no maya. There's no covering or illusion to them. They are completely free from illusion. That means they have all knowledge. So if they have all knowledge of all situations, then they're able to be present, in a sense, everywhere. So the goddess Shri is like that, according to Tengalai Acharyas. According to Wadagalai Acharyas, she's just another god. She's just like a second god, and she's personally present everywhere, just in the same way as Sriman Narayana is personally present everywhere in his Swarupa, his original form, his self form. Okay, so that's the two concepts of the Wadagalais and Tengalais on Shri. So what we have to do is we have to now look back and see historically, is this what Ramanuja was saying? First of all, is this what Yamunacharya was saying? Was he saying that? Does he say that in his Chatusloki? That would be my first question. Go look at those 4 verses by Yamuna and see, is he saying that? Is he saying that she is this type of all-pervasive or that type of all-pervasive? Or is it unclear? I would bet you anything, right, that it's unclear from what the four slokas of Yamunacharya says. Then I would also bet you that Vedanta Deshika comes along and some other people come along and make commentaries on those four slokas and say, yeah, she's all pervasive in this way, and the other person will say, yeah, she's all pervasive in that way, right? So that's the point. Don't think that we're going to be able to solve this problem, right? If you think that you can solve this problem and you can come up with something definitive, which, you know, some quotation from some acharya before Vedanta Deshika or Pillai Lokacharya, right, which definitively says one way or the other, right, and you can therefore go to India, go to Sri Rangam and say to the Vadagalais, haha, this is what I've got, and it says, and it proves that the Tengalai version, or you can go to the Tengalais and say, haha, this is what I found, and it says, it proves the Vadagalai version. If you think you can come up with that, good luck to you. Now, all we have to say is that having studied both the ideas, right? Yeah, they're both different versions. They're both different philosophies, slightly different. Does it make a real difference does it make a real difference? Yeah, I mean, both sides will say it makes a real difference. You know, the Vadagalais will say the Tengalais hate Lakshmi, and the Tengalais will say the Vadagalais have created another god. You know, so okay, so there can be a big fight about it if you want, but what does it really practically mean in terms of difference of actually being a Vaishnava? Tengalais go to Ranganayaki, they go to the goddess's shrine and they worship the goddess Ranganayaki also. We all chant Sharanagati Gajja, we all pray to the goddess Lakshmi to help us, like that. We all have great respect and love for goddess Lakshmi, Sri Devi, and all of her expansions like Sita and Radha and Rukmini, and, you know, all of these Shaktis. We have great respect and we have great adoration and great love for all of these. Does this little slight difference in the understanding of how she's all pervasive, does it really make a big difference in the way that we follow Vaishnavism? I don't think. You know, I haven't seen it. I see the Vadagalais, I see the Tengalais, they basically worship Lakshmi in the same way, like that. So all of the hyperbole on both sides, the hyperbole of the Vadagalais saying that the Tengalais must hate Lakshmi, and the hyperbole on the Tengalai side that the Vadagalais are creating a separate god, right? You know, it just doesn't actually manifest in real life. You know, so these are all basically academic discussions, and it's nice if you want to take one side or the other side. I'll give you an example. In Sri Rangam, there's a festival where Lord Ranganatha comes after visiting one other Lakshmi across the river in another temple, Kamalavalitaya in Warrior Temple. He comes back after visiting this goddess. Right, he comes back and he comes to see his divine consort Ranganayaki, and she slams the door on him, and they have a big fight. Right, and this is a pastime which is enacted. It's a sort of a leela which is enacted every year in Sri Rangam, and there's a discussion that goes on between them. And Sri Rangam devotees in Sri Rangam will say to you, "Oh, are you going to that festival?" Right? And so you say, yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to see this festival of the fight between Lakshmi and Narayana, right? The argument between them, right? It's not a real argument. It's a leela. Okay, so when they say, oh, you're going to there, so whose side are you on? Is what they'll ask you. So they'll ask you, whose side are you on? You're on his side or you're on her side? Right? Are you going to stand outside with Lord Ranganatha and be on his side and try to gain entrance to Lakshmi's temple? Or are you going to be inside Lakshmi's temple with her and try and keep Lord Ranganatha out? Which side are you going to be on? So it's not that the Vadagalais are on one side and the Tengalais are on another side. It's not like that. It's just I mean, I've been to that festival many times, and one time I was on the outside like that, and I thought I wanted to see what that was like, and I went on the inside also, and I wanted to see what that was like. So it's a lot of fun. It's a leela like that. So similarly, this whole little thing about Lakshmi and what exactly the nature of Sri Devi, you know, you're never going to solve it. I don't think you're ever going to solve it. You're never going to have. I mean, both sides feel that they have the definitive truth on their side, but you know, it's never. You're never going to find. You're never going to. I mean, you can come to a personal conclusion, okay? And whatever personal conclusion you come to is absolutely fine with me, right? I have my conviction, and it doesn't mean that I don't respect other people for having the opposite conviction, or I also respect them for having the same conviction. It doesn't make any difference to me like that, because I see that it really, in the ultimate end of everything, purposefully and practically, it has no real difference like that. It's very interesting. If people want to discuss it and people want to talk about it, it's an interesting point of philosophy. There are many interesting points of philosophy, but how they actually affect us in our performance of Vaishnavism is there's practically no difference. So I really don't want to get into a whole argument with somebody about it like that. If we really want to discuss it, we can discuss it. We can study those scriptures and see what those acharyas say, and which is probably going to be in translation anyway. Are we going to read the original Sanskrit? Are we going to read the Manipavala? No. So we're going to read it through somebody else's eyes, a translator's eyes. So if we go to Venkatakrishnan, and ask him to tell us about this, he'll quote so many things and he'll have his opinion. And if we go to Tirunarayan or some Vadagalaya Acharya and ask him, he'll have his opinion and he'll translate it in his way. So we still end up with hearing from different sides. And then we have to decide for ourselves personally who we find more persuasive and the way that we want to think about it or characterize it in our own hearts. And that's it. And that's all there is to it. It doesn't really affect. First of all, it doesn't affect the supremacy of the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana. He's always got his position like that. It also doesn't affect the fact that both sides, both Tangalayas and Wadagalais, accept Goddess Lakshmi as a very, very important part of Sharanagati or property or surrender to the Lord, right? As the mediatrix, as the Purushakara, as the person who's most important, who makes, according to our Sharanagati Gajya, which Ramanuja Sharanagati Gajya makes our property, makes our surrender 100% certain, 100% successful, right? What makes your property 100% successful? The fact that you go through this mediator of Sri Devi. So for all those reasons, it's a very nice philosophical discussion, and we can, while we're here in this material world, we can kill time, kalakshepam, we can kill time by discussing all these things like that, and we will have a realization of that when we understand everything in the situation of liberation. We'll understand everything, and we'll understand everything in truth. Yeah. So if we want to take all these particular texts and go through them to specifically understand the evolution of this doctrine of Sri and how it evolved into these different, slightly different understandings, that's a noble thing to do. Somebody could write a book about it, the evolution of the philosophy on Goddess Sri. We see that also in Gaudiya Vaishnavism too. You have the evolution. You have this other sect of Vaishnavism in Vrindavan called the followers of Hitari Vams, called the Radha Balabas, who basically they've decided Radha is God, and Krishna is just a side story. He's her lover. He's he's not that important in the grand scheme of things. Radha is most important. She's God, and he's part of the story, but she is more important than him. And that's a sect that came out of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, because Hithari Vams was supposedly a disciple of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and he then went off and did his own thing, like that. So you can, if you go to Vrindavan today, you can go to the temple of Radha Ballabha, which is very close to Banka Bihari and Banka Bihari Bazaar, and you can go and there's a temple, and it's interesting. This sect believes that Radha is the most important deity. Radha is God, right? But the deity in their temple is Krishna. The deity in the temple is Krishna, and there is no Radha in that temple. The Radha is seen in an unmanifest form, like in Radha Raman, that she's just a pile of clothes with a crown on top of it, like that, next to Krishna, like that. So in the Radha Ballabha temple, that's the way it is, just like in Radha Raman. And yet the philosophy of the Radha Ballabhas is that Radha is the main deity and Krishna is secondary to Radha in that philosophy. So very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So we see if we study the original forms of Vaishnavism, like in the Sri Sampradaya, these very ancient forms, we'll see all the same problems of philosophy, all the same solutions to these little problems of philosophy come up again and again in the other Vaishnava sects like Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Ballabha. And we see Ballabha talking about property. We see, so when you study Vaishnavism, you get to see the same problems come up again and again and again in different sampradayas and different lineages. But because the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya is the oldest one, the oldest one historically, right? Because of that, therefore, they're the ones who have to deal with these. The Sri Vaishnavas are the ones who have dealt with these problems in philosophy first, historically. And so then later on, of course, these same problems keep, philosophical problems and theological problems keep coming up, and they have to be dealt with again in different contexts, in the context of the Nimbarkas and the Ballabhas and the Gaudiyas, etc. And they deal with them in the same way or in a different way, taking sometimes these newer sampradayas, what they'll do is they'll look at the way that these are handled in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, and they'll adopt some of the answers that have come in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya on the same problem. They'll adopt them into their Sampradaya. So, and then sometimes we see some new ideas, some new interpretations, which that becomes very interesting. So in this way, once all the sampradayas are established, they tend to cross-pollinate each other with different ideas. Like if one set of acharyas gets an idea, they'll say something and they'll propound something, and then some others acharyas from another sampradaya, they'll have some ideas. There's a whole set of literature. So we shouldn't think that these lineages are appearing in total isolation. They're not. All these different lineages are going on at the same time. In Vrindavan, there are Sri Vaishnavas, there are Madhvas, there are Ballabhas, there are Nimbarkas, there are Gaudiyas, there are all these different Vaishnavas. There are Mayavadis, Advaitins, right? So all of these people are writing things. They're all reading everybody else's books. They're reading the books of the other acharyas in the other sampradayas. They may be writing books criticizing the points that the other sampradaya acharyas are giving. So you'll find a whole set of literature where, a Mayavadi will write a book against Vaishnavism, against a particular book that was written by a Vaishnava, and then a Vaishnava will write another book criticizing that book, and then another Mayavadi or a Nimbarka or some person from another lineage will criticize that book. So there's competing scriptures, not scriptures, but commentaries, by different acharyas of different lineages trying to outdo each other, like that. So that's that. There was also a system of debate, of actual debate, where people would debate certain topics. But more than just a debate, if the debate needed to be codified, people would actually write it down into a book, and they put their arguments in a book. Like this type of Mukta Kalapa, which Dr. Alwar is translating by Vedanta Deshika. Vedanta Deshika is putting forward certain points to defeat Buddhism, to defeat Jainism, to defeat certain other, to defeat Beta Beta, to defeat different other philosophies. So we find that also in some other books by Vedanta Deshika, Adhikarana Sharanavali, and whatever it is. We have them all given summary studies by Dr. S.M.S. Chari. So he, this Indian philosophical systems particularly, he points out the good and bad things with different systems. The good in Pancharatra, the good in Saishvara, Sankhya, etc., etc. The bad ideas of the Shaivites and the Pasupatas and the Jains and the Buddhists and all these people. The fallacies of Dvaita, the fallacies of Beta Beta, etc. So these things are all being discussed by all of the acharyas of all the lineages, not in isolation of each other. Everybody knows about the other schools, and they discuss the points that the other schools have brought up. That's why sometimes I'll mention to you that in the Madhvas believe like that, or the Sri Vaishnavas believe like that, or the Gaudiyas, or the Ballavas, or the Nimbarkas, or the Vishnu Swamis, whatever. They have this idea, and in this way, this lineage is a little bit like this one, and this one is a little bit like that one. This one is different from that one in this way. So it's all very interesting if you're looking from a holistic point of view, and you're looking at all these different lineages. But how much the actual differences, these small differences in philosophy and theology make, is debatable, right? Is debatable. There are some really big differences between some schools, and then there are also some very small differences between lineages, and also even within sampradayas. There are differences amongst people, right? In the Madhva Sampradaya, you have the emphasis on bhajan, you have the emphasis on philosophy, right? Which is called the Vyasakuta and the Dasakuta differences in Madhva Sampradaya. So you have the followers of the Dasa Sahitya, the people who are all emotional. They were wrapped up in singing the glories of God, and they were called the Dasas of Karnataka. And then on the other side, you have the people who were writing in Sanskrit. They were writing in some bhajans in Sanskrit, but also in Kannada and everything like that. And the other section of the Madhva Sampradaya, they're all writing in Sanskrit, and they were explaining only philosophy of the Prasthanatraya Gita and the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutras. So there are these different forces there in the Madhva Sampradaya. They're there also in the Gaudiya Sampradaya. In the Gaudiya Sampradaya, you have the Sanskrit learning of the Goswamis in Vrindavan, all their books in Sanskrit on Madhurya Rasa, right? And then you have in Bengal, you have the Bengali literature, and which is very heavily influenced by the Sakya Rasa of Nityananda and Haridas, who went and preach there. So, and these things have to be amalgamated. They either get amalgamated into one thing, or sectarianism comes in, and there's a division like between the Wadagalais and Tengalais. And the same thing happens in other religions. You get the Shvedambara, Digambara Jains, you get the Sunni and Shiite Muslims, you get the Catholic and Protestant Christians, you get all of this. So this doesn't just happen in Indian religions. This happens in all philosophical schools and theological schools. Okay, so yeah, good idea. We can do that. We can go learn more about the goddess Shri and about the details of her existence and her reality, and from these things, if that's interesting. Are there any other questions about pre-Ramanuja, from Nata Muni, the Acharyas from Nata Muni through Ramanuja all the way up to 200 years after them, pre-Vedanteshka, pre-Pilalokacharya?
Not at the moment, Tommy.
Yeah. Okay. So that's they've given a general. He's given a general explanation of it. Okay. If you study it in detail, then there's a lot more. There's a lot of other people, maybe lesser known people. There's also, we could go more into exactly the lives of these people and how, what they did in their lives, and all of the books that they wrote, and all of the, that's why you read Guru Parampara Prabhavam. You read some of these books about the hagiography, the lives of these different saints, and get an idea. We also to understand this, we have to understand the society too that they lived in. So it's not just happy that Ramanuja was there and everybody was a Vaishnava and everybody was, worshipping Lord Narayana. There were Mayavadis there. There were Advaitins. There were Shaivites. Ramanuja had to escape and go to Karnataka for a decade, because there was a guy in Tanjore, the king of Tanjore was a heavy-duty Shaivite who wanted to kill him. So, don't think it was all a bed of roses or all peaches and cream for Ramanuja, that everybody was happy, everybody was a Vaishnava. There was a lot of intrigue going on there. Plus we have, like I said, you had the at the time of Perivartan Pillai and Sudarshana Suri, right? Sudarshana Suri is just coming at the end of this 200 years after Ramanuja, just before, because he's a senior contemporary of Vedanta Deshika. So, we have the Muslim invasions of Sri Rangam, which was greatly disruptive for Sri Vaishnavism in general. Imagine you've got the Vatican, and the Vatican is invaded by a horde of people, and everybody, the Pope and everybody has to leave the Vatican like that for 40 years. That's incredible. That's an incredible disruption in Sri Vaishnavism, right? But it also led to some rebirth of Sri Vaishnavism when Ramanuja went to Karnataka and converted Biti Dev, the king of. There was a Jain king in Karnataka who was converted to becoming Sri Vaishnava. Look at Melkota. Today it's like the bastion of Sri Vaishnavism, right? Whereas in those days, it was just a little outpost. It was just a little temple out there in Karnataka, and it didn't mean anything. But when Ramanuja went there and lived there for 10 years, it became a real big center of philosophy and of Vaishnava preaching. So the way that history and society also affect the growth and the formation of Vaishnava Sampradayas and different lineages and the spread of Vaishnavism, that's very important too. So we have to also know about that. We also have to know about the history, and we have to know about the geography. We have to know about the history. We have to know about the social aspects of society, right? We have to know all of these things in order to fully understand Vaishnavism. So he can't go into all of the aspects about Vaishnavism, but what you really need is to get in a time machine and go back there and really experience it the way it was. We're getting a good idea of what it was like. We're getting of the history and development of Vaishnavism, but we're not getting 100%. We're getting a very shallow. It's somewhat shallow idea of them, because we're just treating a few people. Imagine, even though it sounds like complicated, what we've been discussing today, we've only discussed really about a dozen people, or less than a dozen people, or maybe half a dozen people. There were thousands and millions of people following Vaishnavism, and thousands of millions of people who were not following Vaishnavism at that time. So to really get an idea of how Vaishnavism, the history of Vaishnavism at that time, by just studying, a little bit of the lives and the writings of a half a dozen people, it's totally inadequate to really know the history of Vaishnavism. But we have to start somewhere, and so that's what we know, and that's what we're discussing. But we can have an appreciation, at least, that there's a lot more to learn about the history and development of Vaishnavism. It's fun. I find it, it's fun. I find it incredibly it's almost more interesting than reading the philosophy itself, reading the development and the history of it. You know, how it evolved.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Narayanaya.